Hello, everybody. Liam McCabe here. We are back on my YouTube channel with a second interview, which I hope to be a series of really interesting interviews. And we are starting off with a lot of the interesting people just sort of in my life and people I've met here in the neighborhood in high school. So our next guest is Mark Szuszkiewicz. Did I get that right?
No, nobody does.
How do you pronounce it?
Mark Szuszkiewicz, but as the TV name,
That's what I said. Yeah.
As the TV name, I just abbreviate to Skevich because it's easier to say. But sometimes people still mess that up too. But it is the first time I'm being interviewed because I've interviewed numerous celebrities over the course of 7 years, and I had one quick person interview me at an event, but my first in-depth interview of me being interviewed, so I'm looking forward to being on the other side of the
Yeah,
interview.
I know you did a lot of interviews. Actually, you've had a pretty interesting life, and that's one of the reasons why I wanted to get you on my channel. But first, let's start from the beginning, where we know each other. We go back, obviously, Bay Ridge, but I think before I knew you lived in Bay Ridge, we met in high school, right? Bishop Ford. And we were both on the Bishop Ford track team. So you want to talk a little about Bishop Ford?
I mean, it was great. I mean, the track team, it's a great way to, what sold me on the track team was it's a great way to segue into other sports, because you gain that stamina and all that to be a better basketball player or whatever the case may be. And I ended up just doing track for the first 2 years and then going to football and hockey. But I mean, it was, I enjoyed it. I wish I never left. Otherwise, I wouldn't have all this extra weight on me.
I know.
I would have stayed with those running several miles every day. That's a great habit to have, and we need to pick that back up again.
Yeah, you and I both. I interviewed Tim Clark. That was my last interview. And he got into running later on in life, but became a triathlete and an Ironman. And it kills me because we were in prime shape, at least in high school, and certainly on the track team. But you're right that the track team really never cut anyone. That was really one of the things that attracted to me, is that you could come in, you could compete at any level, and you can go on to do other things. It was great. It's like it accepted everybody from every sport. So when the basketball team or the hockey team was out of season, the track team had something for them.
Yeah.
And it was a great way to train, to cross train. So. And if you wanted to stay on track, you could stay on all 3 seasons. But it was a lot of fun being on the track team with you.
Definitely.
And of course, from Bay Ridge, you're from the neighborhood. So
we used to take the train back after practice, pretty much, since we both got off at the same stop on the R train on 77th Street. So
right.
Bay Ridge is great. I think and I've even seen in some magazine that I think it was ranked like the 3rd best neighborhood in all 5 boroughs at one point in time, and it's like. The best kept secret. I mean, this was years ago too, but I mean, plenty of restaurants, plenty of things to do. You got the park over there by the water, which is a great place to run if you get back into it, or at least walk. Like even in my adult days, I did a lot of walking over there in the park by the water, which is great. And a lot of great things in the neighborhood. I love Bay Ridge.
Right. So let's talk a little bit about your career. Now, you have such an exciting and kind of long and diverse career, but when we kind of left off in college and started to go our own ways, you got originally involved in sales, sort of the financial world, money management, insurance. I think you were a stockbroker and some other stuff. So you want to tell us a little about that?
Yeah, almost immediately after high school, I became a stockbroker at the age of 19. I did some retail sales prior to that, and after that, when I took a brief break from the financial services industry, then I went back in 2005 as a financial advisor for MetLife. That's where I learned a lot more other than just individual stocks. You learn the whole aspect of mutual funds and annuities and life insurance and disability insurance and the full, broad spectrum in detail of all different things you do in financial planning. So I worked for JP Morgan Chase after that, and was one of the top the top financial advisor in the district that I was in. It was during 2008, which was a rough time for the financial market, and a lot of people were doing bad at that point. I mean, as a financial advisor, you still make money either way, but it was sad seeing people who weren't clients of mine individually initially come in. Like, I remember a client that was an employee for Bear Stearns, and she put like over $2 million in her employee stock option plan. And you figure Bear Stearns is one of the biggest companies in the world, but since they failed, it went from like $2.5 million to $50,000. And she came in just wanting something safe. I mean, she's at her retirement age, so imagine how devastating that is. And it was a tough time for a lot of people.
Yeah.
And someone who actually cares about people, it's hard seeing people devastated by that and losing their life savings.
Yeah, Bear Stearns. I remember the iconic, what was it, the $2 bill on the window when their stock dropped, down to $2 a share.
Yeah.
I guess at one point. A lot of people were hurt. A lot of people, obviously.
And it happened so quickly in a matter of 2 days. I remember the branch manager of one of the locations was like, it dropped from 50-something to 20-something in a day. And he's asking me, oh, it's Bear Stearns, they're going to pick back up. I was like, I don't know, something just doesn't sound right about this. Like,
Right.
I wouldn't touch it. He didn't listen to me. He bought in anyway. And then the next day it was like $4 or at $2, whatever the case may be, and JP Morgan Chase ended up being one of the buying them out. I think at $2.
It was a sad time, I think, in the country. So many, mom and pop shops and a lot of people that had their money invested in what they thought was a solid company probably ruined a lot of people's lives in Main Street too. Not only the people involved in the company or in the market, but just the average Joe.
Pretty much, it wasn't just the financial institutions. There was a lot of other, the market as a whole was devastated. You got to think about how many people in their 401k plans, how many people, took a devastating hit, close to retirement because they didn't adjust. The market was doing well for a while, and they didn't adjust to more conservative investments as they got closer to retirement, which is what you're supposed to do.
Right. Now, here's an interesting, funny story. I don't know if you remember this, but way back, maybe before you became such a financial whiz, at one time you sold mattresses, didn't you?
That's prior to the stockbroker, you did say individual. I did say retail sales. I didn't get to specific to it, but
Right.
yeah, I was good at that too. So I mean, you try to be the best at whatever it was. I mean, I was 18 years old. I was making, over $100 a day. At
I think
age
I might have
18,
bought a mattress off of Mark.
I don't recall that, but it's possible.
Now, you talk about finance. Some people still stuff money in the mattress. That used to be an old, way to save money. That was their
or
financial.
underneath it or whatever.
Right.
They were right during 2008. That was the
Maybe that would
that was the
maybe they
safe
should have
one.
gone to your mattresses. That would have been a safer bet for people's money than
Probably.
Bear Stearns. But that's true. I remember that when we were right out of high school. I might have bought a mattress from you. But the other thing you say is interesting is that you started out as a stockbroker. I know a lot of people start out, 20 years ago, we were getting out of high school, they were going into being a stockbroker or sort of specializing in one particular aspect or industry of the financial industry. And then, like you said, at one point, you then took on some of these other sales products, life insurance, some of those other things. And now you see the term financial advisor. So it's not, you don't go to one person, let's just say for your life insurance or to get mutual funds or to be invested in the market. You might go to someone like yourself that has years of experience in different industries and kind of brings it all into one house. And I think what we're going to see in the future, some of what I've read too, is now as people become much more individualized in terms of how they're working, whether they're working for Uber or doing some of this gig economy stuff, they're going to have to be responsible a little bit more for their own retirement. The idea of Social Security staying the way it is very scary.
Yeah, Social Security spending went up significantly again last year.
Right.
More and more people are retiring, and
Less people have pensions. Less people have state and pensions. Certainly, private companies don't offer the
Well,
pensions. They do.
not as many unions out there. Unions used to always have pension plans for their employees, and there's a lot of union busting and union shops that closed down over the years. So that's a big factor in it as well.
And workers are really being hurt by that. So the onus may be on them to find, like you said, financial advisors such as yourself, who can bring in all of those, different investment strategies for retirement, especially, and to kind of protect their assets. And I think that's a big thing of what you were doing.
Well, yeah, definitely. I mean, aside from what I would sell and get a commission off of or advise, I always tell people that if you have a 401k, at least do the company match, whatever it is. Because, companies might match up to 2% of your earnings, up to 6% of your earnings. So if you're making $1,000 a week, then 2% is only $20, and if they're matching that with another $20 for that week, you automatically made 100% on your investment.
Right.
So I mean, they might match 50%. Every company is different, but at least do that, especially if they're matching, because people are like, oh, money's so tight, and you could take, if you're employed most of the time, you could take loans out from your 401k. So some people who build up a 401k, they could go and take a loan out against it and pay off their credit card bills, which are at 20%, and their loan from their 401k is significantly lower. There's exclusions to take it out early without a penalty, aside from a loan, where first-time home buyers and plenty of other things. But aside from the things that I sell or advise, depending on each individual person's scenario, that's pretty much you're missing out on a big opportunity if you're not at least doing what your company matches.
Right. Very interesting. And basically take advantage of your 401k. All the different options is what the message
It's
really
free
is.
money if they're matching it, so you're getting 100% return on your investment pretty much, and almost instantly. It takes a while before you have to stay with the company a while before you're fully vested, and so on and so forth. But not to get into too many details on the program, because I know there's a lot more you want to get into, but it's definitely worth it.
Yeah, no, and I'll just say this. I know that I sort of woke up to investing probably in my 30s. I mean, I was maybe somewhat invested in my 20s, but really woke up to investing in my 30s, and I took advantage of the match. I had the thrift savings program with the federal government, but I obviously have a 401k. I take advantage of everything I can, but it's surprising how many people don't at your workplace. And if you talk to some of your friends, how many people aren't taking advantage of the 401ks? Like you said, they have at their job, at their business, that will do that match.
People
they really
just
should.
don't, they feel that money's so tight that they don't want to put it away, and it's a missed opportunity. And it comes out pre-tax, so that $20, depending on your tax bracket, is really only a difference of 15 or sometimes less, that you're, around $15 that you're actually not seeing in your paycheck. So.
Right. I will tell you this, every person that I do speak to that is in their 50s or 60s, let's just say, that looks back, says, I wish I did take a better advantage of some of these plans, and they're
glad they did.
Or they're glad they did, right. So let's talk a little bit about talk and talk radio. And interviewing. As we started off, you said you usually interview people. You've interviewed a lot of the candidates I know that I've worked for. I brought them onto your show, had them interviewed by you. Grimm. That's right. So talk about that. Talk about how you were introduced into that.
Well, I started 7 years ago. One of my good friends, longtime friend that I've known for about 15 years now, Anthony Jones, he went and wanted me to do his internet talk radio show. And, with the crew that was there, we had a good chemistry. And I said, let's take this to the next level. And we were on AM radio in Westchester. I came up with the name Real Fans, Real Talk. And I put the website together, and, we were on AM radio, and then on BronxNet television in the Bronx, and then on Brick Arts Media, or Be Free now. It used to be BCAT back then, and so a different couple of different outlets for that. And it started out with us just talking sports and getting a couple of guests who are doing interesting things in sports, local sports people, And then the names just started getting bigger and bigger as the time progressed. I remember still one of my favorites to this day, I think it was within the first 2 years of starting, I interviewed New York Knicks power forward Anthony Mason. And that was just being in it. It was at his home.
Yeah,
so
right.
the fact that I was in his house and he let us in and we did an interview, and it's just growing up as a Knicks fan and seeing him play, you know, and then,
That was really
you
cool.
know, I mean, he was one of my favorite Knicks players. And, you know, I said to him, you know, you're my second favorite Knicks player of all time. This is off camera. The off camera stuff.
Too bad you didn't get that off camera.
The off camera stuff was even better than that. He's like, second favorite? What kind of blank is that? So a lot of the
That's
off
great
camera
stuff,
stuff was great, but the on camera interview was great. And I interviewed heavyweight champion of the world Deontay Wilder a few years back in Alabama, as well as Butterbean in Alabama. And, you know, long list of different, especially in the boxing world, heavyweight champions, Larry Holmes, and former champions, current champions. The list goes on. Pretty large in the boxing world, and we had a Super Bowl champion, Walter Thurman, who won a Super Bowl on that Seahawks team a few years back, and a lot of big names. And in the political world, interviewing the mayor candidate Joe Lhota, who won the Republican primary and lost to, you know, the clown that we have in office now, Dumb Blasio.
We used to have I still have the stickers. Don't blame me. I voted for Joe Lhota, right?
Yeah,
You know?
and I thought he was going to do a great job in office if he were to be elected. You know, he just didn't have, I guess, the personality. And, you know, it's, you know, I mean, I remember back then I would think if I had to have a drink with somebody, I'd probably want to have it with de Blasio as opposed to Joe Lhota back
Speak for
then.
yourself. I don't
Not
know
knowing
that.
either one of them. You know what I'm saying? Not knowing either one of them at all.
Right.
Just off of their personality.
Right.
But Joe Lhota was one of the smartest people I've ever met in my life, and he would have done a great job as mayor.
Right.
Had a lot of great ideas, and this mayor is just destroying the city, and he unfortunately even got reelected somehow.
I got to know Joe. I actually think Joe is a very interesting guy to talk to. But I think what the point I get is, you know, Joe had never run for elected office prior to that, right?
Yeah.
And where you had the mayor who was the public advocate, was a city councilman, had been very active in campaigns, and, you know, sort of knew how to be a candidate, how to be an elected official. Whereas Joe was actually doing the work, right, behind the scenes, managing the MTA and helping run the
deputy
government.
mayor for Giuliani.
Right, when they really, this city was put back together after the disaster that we lived through in the 1970s and certainly 80s. And, you know, it's bizarre because I remember that during that campaign, he had these ads that people said, oh, you're fear-mongering. And it said, we're going to return back to the 70s and 80s if the policies that de Blasio is suggesting, you know, we put into place, this is the world we're going to live in. And he was absolutely right. He was prophetic, and it's sad.
It's not completely there yet,
Right.
but he's making steps towards that, especially recently with the bail reform of just allowing criminals to, you know, be released, and it's offering the Mets tickets to come back. You can't give Mets tickets to somebody for free anyway. The Mets suck.
Hey. You're on my YouTube channel, all right? Respect the Mets. On Liam's YouTube
That's
channel.
what happens when you have a Red Sox fan become mayor.
That's true. That is true. He is a Red Sox fan, and so was Bloomberg. Bloomberg was from Boston. It's like we can't get any real, you know, Brooklyn people elected.
Or at least native New Yorkers.
Or native New Yorkers. Well, Giuliani was, and Giuliani
Joe
really
Lhota
was
was born in the Bronx.
right, and great public servants, and really knew what was going on in the city. And I think what's happened now, as you said, is with bail reform, is you have sort of this progressive push. And I think they really operate in the world of theory. And I don't think that they, you know, one thing about being a New Yorker is we talk about, riding the train, riding the R train, getting on to the F train, being kind of street kids, early on, riding the subways, growing up on the streets of Brooklyn, you kind of get a certain level of street smarts, and you sort of see the world more the way it is, especially with all the different diverse people and all the different interests, involved in the world, really right, at play here in the streets of New York. And I think everyone that grows up in other areas, especially in other parts of the country, don't really get that. And I think a lot of the people pushing sort of this agenda are people that haven't lived in New York. So I think they arrive, I think they're educated someplace else. They come to the city and they've come with bad ideas, I think. And unfortunately, we're living out those bad ideas. And you and I were just at a press conference with Nicole Malliotakis, who was, obviously she's running for Congress. She's the assemblywoman in this area. And she was saying the exact thing that you were talking about. But
she didn't bash the Mets though. So.
She didn't bash, no, that's right. But she is running for Congress. You mentioned Congressman Grimm interviewing him, and that segues into the other part of the world is we are involved a little bit in politics. And I know that you have thought maybe about running. I know some people have suggested maybe you take a stand at running for office. One day maybe in Bay Ridge, someplace else. I don't know if you've given that some thought, but you certainly are a dynamic guy. You're kind of this Renaissance man, and I have a list of things to talk about. We haven't even gotten to the other stuff that you're involved in, but we've talked about finance, you've talked about being on TV and some of the other stuff. So talk to us about politics.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of things that I'd like to see changed. And I think one of the things that bothers me the most is a lot of people who do get elected are going to run for election for the wrong reasons. They're not looking to they don't really care as much. They want to advance their career. They want to, make money in the process, and a lot of the legislation, and Nicole actually mentioned it today with the bail reform bill, which was rushed, that a lot of these legislators, they don't actually read what's in front of them. They just what is everyone else, what is the rest of the party doing and why. Right. They get like the Cliff's Notes of it, which oftentimes isn't actually the truth. As she mentioned that they pitched it as with the bail reform bill that it's first-time offenders only and low crimes, but when she went into detail, that's not actually the case. It's not just minor crimes, and there, she does believe, and I do believe, and I've thought about it for a while, bail reform, because there are a lot of innocent people that are stuck that go to Rikers Island and don't have the opportunity for a trial, because how are they supposed to prepare for trial to defend themselves when they're locked up? They get their public defenders, and these are minor crimes, and it's unfair to them. So there was a need for bail reform, but it didn't need to be on the drastic level where violent criminals are released automatically and go out and commit crimes again. The judges are supposed to make that decision as to what previous record, what's the severity of the crime, what type of evidence is there, is it, right. Is it a clean-cut case where 10 people saw this person do it and he's clearly guilty, and he has the possibility of doing it again? Then you don't just set the guy free and tell him to come to court to watch a crappy team play baseball.
There you go again. That's it.
I gotta have the
I'm
comic
gonna get arrested,
relief. I gotta have the comic relief there. I mean, we're talking about serious issues here, so maybe I shouldn't. But at the same time, it is sad. So sometimes,
Well, it's tough. I will say, look, it's tough being a Mets fan at times. I will admit that. But you know what? That speaks to sort of how true believers we are. My father used to say, you're kind of born with being a Mets fan kind of as an affliction sometimes. You know what I mean?
I'm a Knicks fan, so I'm suffering as well.
You're born with other things. But
the Knicks actually won in '86, so they won in your lifetime. I'm sorry, the Mets won in '86, so they won in your lifetime. The Knicks haven't won since '73, so I wasn't even born then. So
right. That was a wild World Series though in '86, and I remember I was at Our Lady of Angels. I was a kid in school, and I remember staying up late with my grandfather and watching those games, Game 6 and 7, was just wild, and it was wild to see the city. And that was when the Mets were sort of the real second class team of New York City. And you say what you want, but I definitely think the Mets' popularity have grown in New York City, and I think they're just more of a mainstream team now, and that's sort of nice. And what do you think of Citi Field?
I'm not sure. I think I went there once for a concert. I don't really recall exactly, but I mean, it seemed nice. I mean,
Okay.
All
right. Now, the other thing, speaking of sports, I wanted to segue into your involvement in Golden Gloves. It's another aspect of your life. Maybe you could talk to us about that.
Well, when I was younger and I saw that the Golden Gloves came to Bishop Ford, some of the earlier fights and stuff like that, and I had an interest towards boxing, and I never really picked it up. I mean, obviously I was busy with a
Also,
lot
Our
of
Lady of
things.
Angels.
Yeah.
And it was a big part of some of the Catholic schools here.
Yeah.
Our Lady of Angels was big, and Bishop Ford as well, a big part of it.
And nowadays the finals are in the Barclays Center, so the idea of fighting, on stage in the Barclays Center was a big thing. And interviewing all these, not only Golden Gloves champions, but actual world champions and so many people in the boxing world, it's like, I just really got inspired. And I was trained by a former welterweight champion of the world, Aaron Superman Davis, who trained me and saw a lot of potential, said that I had the potential to go pro if I stuck with it. I had a lot of punching power, and I had a lot of heart. I fought tired. I was aggressive, and unfortunately, I faced the guy who ended up winning the whole thing. I think that I could have beaten over half the people in the tournament, and even if I didn't go all the way the first year, I didn't want to lose my first fight. I ended up interviewing him on the show afterwards, and in his final fight at the Barclays Center, I did go to it. I had free tickets through a connection over there, and I watched him fight, and he was fighting somebody who was jacked up and everything, and everyone thought that the big, strong guy was going to wipe the floor with him, but I was like, no, watch this kid. He's good. He's going to go, it's going to be the other way around. And he put him on his butt a few times. He never knocked me down,
Right.
But, he put the other guy on his butt a few times. And,
Right.
So, I mean, it is what it is. I still kind of get the urge to go, because I did a few rounds on the bag this morning and the day before that, and I still do it for exercise, but I still get the urge because I think 40 is the max cutoff, and 35 was the max cutoff the year that I fought, and it was kind of a now or never thing. Like, if I'm going to do this, I got to do it now. And, so I did that, and people have their concerns, especially parents, when it comes to football and boxing. And I've interviewed, I haven't released the video yet, but a former champion and world champion and 5-time Golden Gloves champion, Mark Breeland from Brooklyn. I discussed with him about, what message would you give to parents who, about their kids, and there was kind of a general agreement that, a lot of what boxing does for some of these kids is it keeps them off the streets, and
Right.
And football too. Like, you're worrying about the head injuries and things like that. That's a major concern, more now so than ever, that the information's being released. But it keeps a lot of these guys who they don't drink, they don't smoke weed, they don't do any type of drugs or anything. They're just focused on boxing and staying in shape. Would that be the case if they didn't fall in love with boxing? Right. Would they have gotten fat like us?
Right.
We quit track and maybe took up drinking and partying and maybe doing drugs, or you don't know where their life would be if they didn't find boxing, or if they didn't fall in love with football. So there's a risk-reward scenario with that, because you do a lot of brain damage to your brain from drugs and alcohol too.
Right.
So
there's a great tradition, I think, in Brooklyn. Certainly, some of the boxers, amateur boxers, and professional boxers I've come into contact with. You speak of Michael Grimm. We used to have his district office used to be right next to a jewelry, and the jeweler's son, Boyd Melson, was an amateur boxer. He was a West Point graduate, and he tells a story of, I think, coming back from addiction and being out on the streets. And he went all the way to West Point, graduated, had a phenomenal boxing record, And an interesting story too. He used to take his winning purse and donate it to a very special charity. And I thought that was great. And it's, again, a story of a kid who from the streets, might not have been doing the right thing at certain points, but found boxing. Right down the block from where we are was Saddam Ali. And we're going back maybe about 10 years ago when I first met Saddam Ali. He no longer has the boxing ring, but right on 5th Avenue and 69th Street.
Yeah, I remember I met him there once before.
Saddam, and he was an Olympic boxer, so he got into boxing at an early age as a kid, and was eventually able to fight for the United States as an Olympic boxer. And as he was an amateur and getting into his professional status, he had a ring and right here in Bay Ridge. And I remember that Congressman Grimm and myself would go there and train with him. And one of the great things that I would see is, as you said, day in and day out, the kids were attracted. You know, and a lot of kids, I grew up hanging out on 69th Street. That was sort of my hangout. And the kind of kids that I grew up, kids just like me, you know, kids that grew up on the streets would come in because they were interested. And he had a very open door policy. He was very nice. And he would give kids that couldn't afford gloves, or tape, or shorts, or shoes. He sort of give it away free, and he didn't make a lot of money, but he brought a lot of kids in off the street, and they trained there, and some of them really took off and took boxing into another level. And Saddam now is boxing, I think, for Golden Boy. He no longer has that gym there, but that was a godsend for the community. And sometimes people forget about that. I never have, and I know that you've probably come to some of those matches as well.
Yeah. And you don't even have to take up boxing with the intent of fighting. Like, you think about the stress relief that it gets just hitting the bag. You know, sometimes you're frustrated and people want to punch a wall or something. But just imagine punching a bag for a few rounds and just getting that great cardio in, the good health. And when I was playing football or planning to compete, I always ended up getting in great shape, eating healthy, because that was a motivational factor. I have this fight coming up in 3 months. I gotta get it together and lose weight quickly, and whatever. So it's it's not for everybody, but it's I wouldn't necessarily discourage it completely, because it's there's a lot of pros to it as well. So
now it's good. Talk about being fat. I put on a lot of weight, but behind us, you see, me and my wife were just married in October, Christine.
I was there. Congratulations.
That's right.
Again.
That's right. You were there. It was a lot of fun, as you know. And we both lost a bit of weight. I sadly put a lot of it back on.
Yeah, so did I.
Yeah.
I lost 60 pounds.
Probably put it on at the wedding because the food was so delicious.
Yeah. Well,
Thank you, Liberty
I
Warehouse.
put back on about 25 pounds since the wedding,
Right.
but that's not as a result
You and I
of the
both.
wedding.
We put on a person between us.
Yeah.
But I did kickboxing. I did CKO kickboxing. And, whether it's kickboxing or just hitting the bag at the gym, it certainly is one of the best workouts. Full body workout, cardio, strength. You work out all kinds of muscles. You build up your endurance. And, the pounds just sort of shed throughout the day,
Yeah.
You lose.
And you just feel so much better and more mentally focused throughout the day when you get any type of exercise, whether it's boxing or running or whatever the case may be. So it's always great to start out a day, in my case, hitting the bag or lifting weights or whatever.
Yeah. And, just to go back to that, I wish we had a community sort of push